Welcome back, audience. Hope you're doing good, as always. Where's my tea? It's not here. Anyway. Well, in this video, I want to talk about interesting phenomena of how there's two ways, or two drives, as I call them, to produce energy or the sources of energy. And the reason I want to talk about because you can see it happening more prevalently, and maybe in yourself as well. I've noticed in myself for sure that certain drives, for example, why some content is so much more popular. I mean, okay, I'm not saying anything new, but you can see that the energy which is necessary to create anything, right, to impose your will on the reality, is derived from this thing called friction, or in science called fission, which is pretty much like splitting it up, right? It's splitting the pattern up. And so that's pretty much how ego derives its energy. It is conflict based. It always needs friction to sustain itself, to sustain the energy. And it derives the friction through basically, it's like a pattern that is, of course, this virtual pattern, psychological pattern. It's this identification with some ideology or some, it doesn't matter. It's identification to anything, which, by the way, all politics is like that. I mean, religion is politics, identity is politics. This is all politics because it deals with the world of policing the patterns, if you will, right? So the matrix game, right, and it runs on the friction and conflict. It needs conflict to survive. Now if you look a little even deeper, the seed of these patterns and what generates these patterns, it's simply the feeling, without making anything too esoteric. It's just a feeling that is at the core of a person engaging in this type of friction-based economy or friction-based energy production. Okay, you can notice, even watching some videos, look, there's like political, dramatic, lots of views, right? And even myself, sometimes I would go like click on a video, watch it, and was like, yeah, man, like it excited me for all the wrong reasons. It's not exciting me that much anymore, but it's not a lot of excitement left, to be honest, because I've alchemized almost everything. But there's still some there which I have to alchemize until I can just really see for that video for what it is. It's just completely pointless waste of time, and it's trying to revive your ego and through the friction and saying like, look, there's this pattern out there, it's wrong, and so now your thought, which is your pattern, is now coming in the contact with another pattern, which is just another thought, and is creating that heat, that friction, which gets you kind of angry or passionate, like I call it dark passion, and drives you. And guess what? Like anything you're going to do out of that is just going to be bonkers and stupid. This is why that type of energy is important, where you derive your energy from, because if you derive the energy through this type of source, anything you do is going to be tainted with it. You see? Man, it's so important. So, okay, so now we described the fission process, which, by the way, is interesting. That fission process is exactly what's used for the nuclear explosions. Is splitting, exploding, separating, right? It's destroying. It's like, and make no mistake, the way the consciousness is structured, that a pattern detecting another pattern Guess what happens when that happens? It wants to destroy it, right? So this is why it's not a surprise that people who identify with these patterns want to kill other people who identify with another type of pattern, right? Identification with it is the problem. All politics, identity politics. People say like, this is identity politics. All politics is identity politics. Religion is nothing to do with spirituality. It's political game. Because I've explained before, a true religion cannot be in a group. It's a unique and a personal process in every person. It's its own religion. So this is why it has nothing to do with the spirituality. This insistence on the having one identity or the other, and this communication that like, well, I'm afraid of somebody that could potentially eliminate this pattern in me, which I identified with, which means I'm afraid for my life. It's just ego saying that doesn't want to die, the pattern, right? Of course, all ego patterns are meant to be dissolved and destroyed. That's the whole point of it. But sometimes people confuse the identity that they feel like they are with who they really are. And that's usually, we call them psychopaths, NPCs, and whatever. The people who are just disconnected from their soul because they identify with the pattern that they're running and say, that's who I am, And so this is what's going on right now. This is Babylonian matrix, right? And it produces a lot of heat. It produces a lot of energy. So you can see a lot of people kind of engaging there. But the thing is, you don't want to engage there. If something happens and something comes into your field of vision, it's not to be ignored. It's not to engage it and heat up the fire even more. But if it heats you up and that triggers you or whatever, instead of, there's two motions that you could do. You could just continue escalating this friction and create some sort of thought or belief that you're going to take some sort of action to alleviate that or whatever. So that's the dark path. Or you could just sit with that feeling and you can literally dissolve that pattern without fighting anybody within your own consciousness, within your own soul. And that's the alchemy that I've been always talking about. That's the first thing. The thing is, what happens is that when you dissolve that pattern, you enter this another type of energy production called fusion. Because you're dissolving something, dissolving the patterns that they do not match, and then you're fusing and you're creating some like a new pattern that is through fusion. It has its own energy, and so I sometimes refer to them like being forms, like thought forms, being forms. Like thought forms are just basically like beliefs floating around. This is what everybody's fighting with each other. Well, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people fighting with each other because they identify with these thought forms. But there's another thing that's called, and the thought forms always split. It is always dual. There's one part of that pattern, another part of that pattern that is in a friction. Through fission creates the energy. But when you alchemize, when you fuse those two patterns that were not compatible become one single pattern that is not in a conflict, right? This is why that's the thing between the difference between there's a fact and there is a lie, but the truth, it's neither a lie, neither fact. It stands on its own. How to explain it? It doesn't have an opposite, right? For example, a belief has a doubt. Truth is already integrated, the belief and a doubt in one. This is why it's truth. So there's these dual thought forms and then these unified being forms, as they call them. And these being forms are basically an inspiration to create something, whatever you want to create, right? Anyway, to take the message home, it's about two sources of energy, one produced through fission, another produced through fusion. And this is quite interesting as well. Like if you look at it outside and the way we manage energy as people, we use fission to destroy, and then we use fusion to generate and light the cities, right? To generate energy and light the cities. So it's quite interesting, right? I also think that's just like my little theory that nuclear fusion plants have an effect that is positive, not just through by generating the energy itself, but it's generating something more there. It has a positive effect on people. Anyway, I don't want to get into this subject, but this is just one thing that I just want to mention real quick. Okay, fission fusion. And so the exact same thing happens in your consciousness, right? You want your energy to be coming from what I call inspiration, not motivation. Like you don't want to have a motive. A motive is already something that is kind of split and is looking for another side. But after the alchemy, you don't have motive. You have an inspiration. That's another type of passion that makes you do things, but not out of friction. You're not there to fight anything, or it hasn't stemmed from a conflict, or you're not there to prove somebody wrong, and all of these motivations that we sometimes just take it as a noble thing to engage in, right? And so you end up having all these lots of people doing useless things, and other people praising of how good that they had the energy to do so. And you see what I'm trying to say? Like that's all nonsensical bullshit. It's this idea of fighting with yourself and winning, which is quite a paradox, right? It's you never win actually fighting with yourself. You always lose. But it looks like there's an action going on. This looks like there's an accomplishment, right? So the way to resolve conflict is not to be into this type of friction and generate heat and try to destroy each other's patterns. The way to resolve conflict when conflict arises is a chemical way. It's not. It has. You have to go into your soul. It cannot be stay. It cannot stay in the mind. And that is attention on that source of the feeling that is arising during the conflict until it's completely alchemized. And once you literally took those two patterns that don't fit together and you've alchemized and unified, and now they do fit together, and then something new is born that is out of those two patterns that would not fit and created the friction, right? And so now they're fused together, and guess what? They're always producing energy. They're emanating energy. That's the beauty of the nuclear reactor. I often equated this alchemical process with the nuclear reactor, and because it's almost, it may not be almost, it may be exactly what's going on when you fire up your own nuclear reactor, your own energy. That is what I call this, white passion. The dark passion and white passion. I kind of separate those two sources of energy. And you may even have like a dark passion based relationships, which is politics and wars are based on that. And light passion based relationships, okay, um, which again, it's not weak. Some people say, well, avoiding the conflict. You're not avoiding the conflict. In fact, you're actually confronting the conflict, but you're not resolving it through uh, that heat thing, right? It dominating that pattern. There's no resolution there. Conflict has to be resolved, of course, when it happens, but it has to be done alchemically first, and then if there's any kind of action needs to be taken physically, then you take physically. um, the physical strength and the physical power is necessary also, if it's necessary, but it is only done after the alchemical process is done. So it's not done out of anger, it's not done out of this. It is done, if it's necessary, out of just sheer correctness and right thing to do kind of thing. I think there are stories about how samurai would not kill their opponent if they got angry about their opponent. They say like, well, you know, they didn't want the karma. They believed in karma, that like if they killed somebody out of anger or fear, which is the same thing, that they will be, infected with that uh, darkness that they were trying to eliminate. Okay? All right, so enough about this side. Now we know what to do with this side. And so the fusion. Okay, one thing I want to say about this friction and these patterns, right? So the problem happens when you have those two different identities and they are in conflict, right? But that is psychological, it's virtual, it's not real. It's kind of stupid when you think about it, when it's just beliefs of people. Actually, it's not a belief, it's conditioning, because it's already been conditioned. Belief is something that they could already have different beliefs, but the conditioning just still makes them act the way they act. And so there's a lot of conflict and killing each other over something that is not real. It's virtual, it's not real, right? That's the problem with the identity, politics and wars and stuff like that. It's not about survival anymore of your body. It's about survival of the pattern that you have in your thoughts, right? So that's very different. Now, saying that, I want to say something about the physical world, which is supposed to be run on the motivation. Psychological world is supposed to be run on the nuclear fusion, if you will, or fusion, generating energy through the inspiration. The physical world is supposed to be run through type of fission or friction. The physical world is supposed to be run like that. Meaning, when I say the physical world, I mean this is how you live your life. So that's why there's this confusion of like how to live your life, because the outer layer of reality, the matter, behaves the opposite of how the inner, right? So the patterns that you're trying to create in the physical world it's completely different. For example, like you need to have your house, you need to have your car, you need to have your food. Like these are all infrastructures that you need to have to sustain yourself physically, right? All the things that you need. So you create your infrastructure to sustain yourself physically, and that is completely valid. And there is a valid application of the survival drive physically, right? But there's nothing to do with psychological world. The reason I'm saying that is that the use of force, or the use of like some tangible change in life that is necessary to be done because it's incorrect, like logically incorrect something. You can correct it physically, right? It's totally valid. And even the energy on the physical world, it is okay if it's derived through fission. For example, like if you play sports, right? It's a competitive sport, let's say. All sports, I suppose, are competitive if it's a sport, right? But you don't hate your opponent. You don't want to kill your opponent. You want to destroy it, ideally, right? Yeah. but um, but there's this competition there, right? And then in a way, it's a type of friction, and it is a game, and it's totally valid to engage in this type of activity. It's a physical competition, but hopefully with no ego. What I'm trying to say is that to have this type of drive that is motivation based, which is the accomplishment of some goal or some task in a physical reality, an agreed upon game or play, is totally valid, and that gives your body energy. Does that make sense? So I'm not completely abolishing this source of energy, but I'm just saying that it only is applicable. Uh, the motive is only applicable in the physical reality itself if it's necessary. It's not psychological, right? Because body also generates energy through uh, through friction. I mean, when you exercise and it produces heat, it produces energy. It's quite interesting, actually. So this is why moving your body, uh, playing competitive games, and all these physical stuff that your body wants to do are totally valid motivation to have. Okay, just want to say that I'm not abolishing this concept of this type of energy, but I'm saying it's only applicable in the physical reality. And hopefully, I'm communicating well enough to differentiate those two. The psychological motivation, there is no psychological motivation, but there's physical motivation, and that physical motivation is to have a strong, healthy body and physical safety, right? It's a survival and reproduction, which, by the way, sex is included in this as well. Okay? So, that is important to say this because you don't want to completely abolish this type of energy because I think it's a mistake to do so. Um, but it has to stem from physiological needs and not psychological needs. Let's just say that. Okay? Do I need to say anything else about that? No, I think it's all right. Okay, so that's an appropriate use of those two energies, right? The fusion happens in your soul. It's an inspiration to create and or engage in whatever the activity your soul desires. This is this thriving drive that is also important to be fulfilled. Okay, that passion moves you and inspires you and makes you take action. But it's not a dark passion. It's not a revenge based passion. It's not that, like, oh, like I'm contra somebody. I'm against something. I'm anti something. And so now I'm passionate about this thing because we have to, you know, eliminate the opposition or whatever, that kind of thing. You have to be honest about that. If you haven't alchemized that, all your passion is going to be dark passion. Only through the alchemy you get to unify those two energies, and then they generate a different type of passion. Okay. Anyway, so you can also notice like where you place your attention as well. Like if you look at the video and it's triggering you and whatnot, it's best to alchemize that and not to have a desire to watch these videos, because they have a pull. You see, they have a pull. Because why do they have a pull? Because they have that energy, they have that friction, and your ego wants to reboot itself and whatnot. It just wants to like to see if there's any kind of this stays with something that is there that could spark your ego up. Which is not worth it. You have to take away all of your attention. But anyway, if your attention is going there, it means that you still have to alchemize something until it's gone. And so you can really look at it this way. Soul generates through nuclear fusion, and ego generates energy through fission or friction. Okay. And if anybody or you are still kind of end up in a conflict situation where you are wasting your energy on trying to resolve the conflict to some argument or whatnot, there is still a part of you that is hasn't been alchemized yet, because then you get caught into that energy. Okay, I think that's it. I think I communicated. There's two sources of energy: the light passion that only happens through a chemical process, and the dark passion that only happens through I don't know how you call that, but you can go into dark passion really, really deep, and become really dark person, and that's just temporarily going to get you relief from suffering. But then it's gonna get you're gonna all that darkness that all the darkness that you've engaged is you're gonna have to then transmute. This is why people who go that path all the way, they better know how to transmute all these energies, because to alchemize that level of darkness is extremely difficult. This is why normally people they would rather die than engage into the alchemy. If they too far gone. But anyway, I think I just want to say that that body drive and your soul drive are opposite in the way they produce energy. You see. And so the fusion is your soul drive, which is all your relationships and the reasons why you do things, and the inspiration, it is from the gut feeling. That's what it stems from. You do it like this. But then physically, when you gotta physically, when you need to move something from one place to another, right, you do need another type of drive. This is why there is an inspiration, all the ideas, everything, and then action. And it uses different types of energies. Okay? So ideally you want your body to generate energy, or that motivation energy, through, what you call it, the friction, right? Like going to the gym, dancing, and or getting shit done or whatever. This is all the energy that is produced through that friction. And the friction is like, okay, there is a certain pattern that is out there, and I'm I want to change that pattern, and physically it's valid, right? This is the true application of willpower. All willpower is supposed to be applied in this level and not psychological, because if you, right, you see what I'm trying to say? On the objects, on things, and your body, that is valid. That's how you produce the energy, through friction and through motion. And if something looks one way and you want it to look a different way, it's a valid motivation to have. If it's, you know, adds any kind of value or a function. Okay, I don't want to digress too much on this one. Anyway, I just wanted to communicate that there is a fission based energy. The ego is producing energy through conflict, and fusion based energy is all producing energy through this uh, union. And it's unifying those two patterns that are not supposed to be unified, right? Well, mind cannot unify them, but soul has the capacity to unify them. Okay. Um, I think that's it. All right. Peace. See you next one.